a last objection against this view. And this is going to be an objection from a style of argument called evolutionary debunking arguments. And the idea here is that things that you believe that would have come about solely from evolutionary reasons aren't things that you can trust for truth's sake when you're thinking about, unless you have good reasons for it, unless you can come up with reasons for it, right? Because here's an example of how using this. Imagine being a rational egoist amongst a bunch of altruists. We're early man, and we're trying to just survive, scrap, and save, and all that stuff. Maybe not save, but scrap to get by. And then you approach everything from, I'm going to take as much stuff as I can. Everybody else is approaching it from, I'm going to give some away and share. Well, you would be much more likely to survive. And if that's the case, then the rational egoist probably just evolved that way. So when you sit back and evolutionary thinking like that wouldn't be trustworthy, right? When you sit back and you think, yeah, that sure seems to be right? Like that rational egoism just seems to be right. The idea here on this objection is, well, of course it's right. It seems to be right because you just evolved that way to think that way. So you don't get to just rely on that it seems to be right. You have to give some arguments for that, and we've seen that rational egoism, although that it's appealing in some ways, doesn't have the arguments to back it up. You would believe rational egoism whether or not we're true. So you need to actually give some arguments for it. Evolutionary debunking arguments are not great. They're not strong arguments, and the reason being because you can argue evolution, what is evolutionarily helpful any way you want to, right? Really, the way they end up typically arguing is by saying, this is the way things are, therefore they must have been the best way for survival, and then so you can't turn around and say, but this is the, therefore this is the, this shows that it only happened by evolution. I mean, we're just assuming it happened by evolution and then saying, therefore it must have been what helped survival in the most. So I don't think these are great arguments. Here's a second response, though, that doesn't have to do with evolutionary debunking arguments specifically, by a philosopher named Crisp. He says, what best increases reproductive fitness is not actually rational egoism, it's kin altruism. It's thinking about your family first. When you are rolling with that family unit, that small, tight unit, maybe not just your family, maybe a few tight friends or something like that, then you guys are going to act as a cohesive group, and then as a cohesive group, you're going to be able to defeat all the rational egoists, right? Since you're rolling in a gang, then you'll be able to take out every individual, and you will be surviving a lot more. The philosophers that give the evolutionary debunking argument here say that, well, those are pretty close, right? The rational egoist and the kin altruist are going to make a lot of the same conclusions. So, yeah, close enough. I mean, something around there was what evolved. But that's probably not true. Probably, if you think about it, probably a rational egoist is going to come up with a lot different solutions to a lot of different things than kin altruist will be. So, kin altruist, for example, might recommend that I sacrifice myself for my family, right? It might demand that, right? When let's say I'm a dad of a litter of children, and I could sacrifice my life in order to survive them. Probably that would be the right thing to do on kin altruism, but on rational egoism, that's ending my life, so I get no more benefit after that point. So, the two views probably do diverge. Also, there is no plausible argument that begins with kin altruism and concludes with rational egoism. Never can we say something like, we should worry about our closest kin and then say, therefore, we should worry about ourselves only. Those two things don't seem to the one doesn't seem to be entailed by the other. So then when you have, objections to one, it doesn't seem like they affect the other. Also, when the response is given, yeah, they're going to be close enough. It doesn't seem like that doesn't seem to really have anything to do with the argument. The argument is rational egoism is what was evolved for us to believe, not that these conclusions are true or false, right? So comparing the two to something, to each other, the results to each other, doesn't really make any difference to the actual objection itself. All right, here's an additional response given by the rational egoists. They would say that typically when people will argue for these other views, let's say, for example, utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the view that you should give the greatest good to the greatest amount of people. Typically, they'll start off by assuming rational egoism. They'll start off by saying, I believe that I should benefit myself, and then from there they will note, hey, doesn't it seem like there's no difference between me and everybody else? Why should I just benefit myself? And then they'll conclude to, yeah, I should benefit the most number of people, something like that. So the rational egoist will say, if the evolution of this belief is reason to discredit this belief, then it's also reason to discredit all those other beliefs that begin with that as a premise, right? They start off with rational egoism, and if we're going to say rational egoism is something that we can't trust our intuitions about, then we couldn't trust our intuitions about it to help prove the other systems. Which is true up to a point, so long as that's exactly how you're arguing. But if you are arguing for a different system for different reasons, then it doesn't undercut it at all. So, for example, a utilitarian will believe sometimes that it's self-evident that we should benefit the most number of people and the most amount that we can. And if that's the case, then it's not resting on rational egoism. So the fact that these evolutionary debunking arguments are undercutting rational egoism doesn't affect the argument for those beliefs. Another response is that if believing that one ought to act as a kin altruist rather than a rational egoist is what best increases reproductive fitness, then rational egoism is, like utilitarianism, not undercut. What does that mean? That means, let's say the gang mentality is actually what is best for survival. So that's probably that's the one that we're not able to trust, right? That's the view that gets undercut. And then we look at rational egoism, and just like utilitarianism, when we said this isn't a view that would have evolved because it's not something that best produces fitness for survival, then we would say, so then this is good reason. If this is an intuition we have that we should benefit ourselves, and then we do have good reason to believe in that intuition, because it wouldn't be the case that it would evolve just because of the fitness of survival. I don't know that I like that response either. This is why I don't like these evolutionary debunking arguments, because I mean, it's also the case the most obviously the characteristic with the most chance of survival is the one that will most likely survive, but also one that just is really likely to survive would survive as well, right? So even if kin altruism is the most likely belief that we would have had evolved because it helps us to survive the most, well, it seems to me a rational egoist could also have been evolved that way because it would help with survival, even if it wasn't the best. And even utilitarianism could, because even utilitarians, if you're coming at it as a utilitarian and telling everybody, I want to benefit the most number of people, everybody, then everybody might want to cooperate with you. So yeah, this is exactly why I dislike these kinds of arguments. I just don't think they're very helpful. A final response is that one thing that utilitarians point to is the belief that pain is bad. And this belief that pain is bad best increases reproductive fitness, whether or not it's true, right? If you believe that pain is bad, you will avoid pain, and that's going to help you to not get damaged in any way, and that's going to make you, more fit for reproduction or survival or whatever it is. So even if nothing is good or bad, believing that pain is bad might increase my motivation to avoid pain, and so lead me to survive longer, right? So maybe rational egoism is something along those lines. An objection to this is that it's not necessarily the case that believing that pain is bad is going to help you with survival, right? It's just the case that avoiding pain is going to help you with survival. You don't have to sit there and think, I think pain is a bad thing. You just have to say, ow, and walk away, right? And that's going to help you to survive more than somebody who says, ow, I like that, let me do some more, right? Those people are going to die. But then again, you could respond right back for the rational egoist. Yeah, you don't have to believe in rational egoism. It's not that rational egoism is a belief system that needs to evolve. It's that the egoistic actions are actions that we need to tend towards, right? It's the case that when you present me with the opportunity let's say the opportunity to stick around and help my brother, or walk away and go to a utopian society. If I choose the latter, I'm more likely going to survive than if I choose the former and I have to stick around with a failing business. It's not the case that you have to sit there and think, well, which one would be the right thing to do? It's the case that you just have to do the action. So it's the actions that are going to be produced, not necessarily the beliefs. I mean, definitely there are some underlying beliefs there, but the point being, we can do things all the time just because we like or dislike them without having any actual beliefs about them. We could have subconscious reasons, we could just be drawn to a certain thing and have an aversion from certain things. So yeah, ultimately, that's why I would say these type of arguments just seem to fail. I don't like them in almost any time I hear. I bet you there are some good reasons to believe them, but not that I would know. In any case, that is it for rational egoism. Again, these are academic videos that you're watching right now. Right? These are supposed to help the budding philosopher, the person in philosophy class who has to do a project on rational egoism and has no idea what that means, and just somebody who really wants to think every little detail through, right? And not that that's a bad thing. It sounds, when I say that, it sounds kind of like you're nitpicking, but not really. It's that you see the initial video and you on the Philosopher Show, and you think, okay, that's a good reason, but what are all the reasons? I want to consider this thing thoroughly. And if that's the case, hopefully this has helped you. Please ask any questions. Hit me up on the comments on this, man. Like, I'd love to help you guys out. My job is philosophy teacher, right? I love to teach philosophy. So yeah, hit me up and I'll and maybe I can even do videos that will help you and other people with your questions. And that's all I got. See you.